Hey, how's it going? So I wanted to talk about chapters 4 and chapter 6 in When Kids Can't Read. So in chapter 4 on the explicit instruction and comprehension, this is interesting because it's the importance of teaching children, students, how to comprehend the text, not just the text itself, but how to comprehend it. So like she said at the beginning, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for one day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. You know, you probably heard this 100 times, but it's very, it's very applicable to this chapter. So, like she says here, we spend little time teaching comprehension strategies, but we spend a lot of time helping people understand what the text is about. So, there's a lot of connectors here on page 41. Strategies for comprehension, clarifying, comparing and contrasting, connecting to prior experiences. And she says that teachers don't explicitly teach this, but we probably should. Okay, so how do we do this? She says that we need to model how we do it. And these strategies can be taught. And yes, it does take away time from the class, but it also is essential because, if you spend a little time on it at the beginning on these different strategies, then later on, when you're reading other texts, hopefully these will be embedded and your future activities will move quicker. So the idea here about modeling what you're doing as a teacher, about thinking aloud, well, in this case here on pages 41, 42, 43, she gives some great suggestions here, about being clear, about thinking aloud, about developing strategic readers for the students, and particularly, there's some pretty good ideas here that we probably thought about, but we haven't actually put into practice. When you go to driver's ed class, he tells you to do certain things, but because you have to kind of think aloud. You can't just watch somebody drive and assume you know how to do it. You have to go through the process yourself, but have someone kind of walk you through it. So on page 44, the difference between direct instruction and scripted instruction. Kind of interesting. So like direct teaching, teaching parts that need to be taught when they need to be taught, as opposed to a scripted instruction. And on page 45, on page 45, there's a great list on the top there about the differences between the two. So my question to you, class, is, on the top of page 45, it talks about direct instruction and scripted instruction. How much flexibility do you have in what you teach? I suppose as an assistant teacher, you're following what the other teachers say, but a lot of teachers, I believe, from what I understand, have more flexibility in designing their own how they want to teach, as long as they, get through the curriculum. So looking at this is kind of interesting. Thinking about these things as strategies and not skills, no? Because a strategy it has a different type of a meaning when you put that together. So once again, play on words, instruction and instructions. She says she was good at giving instructions, but not at instruction itself. There's a lot of interesting stuff. The 4 different transcripts she runs through here towards the end of the chapter have a lot of different, it's just great to see how it worked. Just for time here, I'm going to move on. So chapter 6 here on page 73. So it's really interesting because you got listening, reading, speaking, and writing, right? Yeah. So the 2 passive ones are reading and listening, supposedly, and the active ones are speaking and writing. I got those right. But here she says, on page 73, the reading is an active process, and it starts before you turn to the first page. So this is pre-reading strategies. Great ideas here. You've probably done a lot of these already, but on page 74, I use this analogy a lot. If I give you a book with just like no cover, it just says page 1, and hey, take a look at this. You might start reading, but you have no context about what's going on. You like to look at the cover, the front of the book, the back of the book, inner reviews, inside the flap, what's the author, when was it written, Is it hardcover, softcover? Any reviews on it? What did the table of contents say? And so, these pre-reading strategies we all use when we grab a novel, for example. But people that don't have them, it's just like grabbing a bunch of papers and starting to read them. So that's a pretty good analogy there. The anticipation guides that she talks about here, on page 77 and 78, she's got a couple of choices here. It's a lot of work to set these up, but if you repeat texts, it's highly worth it to use these sorts of things. A lot of other strategies. KWL, page 80. I spoke to the class about this the other day. Those of you that came, a lot of people use this all the time. KWL, what I know, what I want to know, what I want to learn, and what I learned. This is kind of an off of different version of the 1-minute essay that I put in. If you take a look at the PowerPoint that I put on different teaching strategies, the 1-minute essay is one that I use a lot. KWL is kind of similar to that, but she nails it down and gives you a lot of different examples about it, applying to a lot of different texts. Probable passage on page 87. It encourages students to make predictions, to activate their prior knowledge about a topic, and see causal relationships between them. So there's a lot here. And then she has one here at the end, which kind of, I did the tea party on page 94. I've never done this. It looks kind of interesting, but I don't see too much of a explanation here on it. But the example here is okay. Page 94, the word splash. So this is an interesting activity that she mentions that's similar to the previous one. But that sounds like something I've heard a couple of students using that also. So I think chapter 6 is really important. The idea about pre-reading. I know a lot of you probably work with it already, but this has some other interesting points there to look at.